Most people scroll past maps, but one narrow water lane can slow the fuel that moves factories, food, and flights. What happens when tankers hesitate here is not a distant headline, it is a pressure point on everyday life. Picture a pinch on the shipping map. Giant tankers, slow and heavy, must thread a narrow maritime corridor linking the Persian Gulf to the wider oceans. On a phone screen, the passage looks small. In the real world, geography still forces energy cargo through limited sea room, and simple fact is why this lane keeps returning to global attention. While recommendation feeds fill with stories of artificial intelligence finding a drug in days or quantum machines promising the next computing leap, a quieter question waits underneath. What still depends on steel ships moving through one watched corridor at the tempo of weather, schedules, and human caution rather than software speed? This documentary will not sell panic and it will not pretend to prophesy. In the minutes ahead, we map why the Strait of Hormuz sits at the center of oil shipping anxiety, how a shipping crisis can ripple into fuel, freight, and prices without a single blockbuster explosion, why physical choke points still matter in an age obsessed with breakthroughs. Our rules stay plain. Facts will be separated from theories and speculation. We will not invent statistics. We offer no advice on routes, insurance, or politics, only a careful look at friction, confidence, and dependency. If one lane is so important, why does the world still rely on it? What does a shipping crisis actually look like when the cameras are not rolling? A maritime strait is simpler than the word sounds. It is a natural bottleneck. Where land closes in and the sea narrows, ships lose the open freedom of deep ocean. They must pass through limited sea room, one after another, following the shape of the planet rather than the wishes of any market. The Strait of Hormuz is one of those passages. It sits between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, a corridor that links energy-producing coasts inside the Gulf to wider waters. The shipping lanes beyond, coastal states border those waters. Traffic patterns concentrate here. For that reason alone, the corridor is strategically watched, not as a mythic switch that turns the world off, as a place where geography gathers risk into a smaller space. Think of oil and product tankers less as dramatic silhouettes and more as floating infrastructure. They are slow, they are expensive to build and to run. They move on schedules shaped by terminals, contracts, weather windows, and port queues far from the strait itself. A tanker does not improvise like a delivery van. It responds to risk signals, to the mood of insurers, to congestion at loading ports. Even a whisper of delay can ripple through a chain that began weeks earlier and will finish weeks later. That is what people mean when they call a place an energy choke point. Disruption risk is concentrated, not because every barrel on Earth must stop the moment something happens here, because alternatives can be limited, slower, or costlier. Other routes and other energy sources exist, yet they may not match timing, grade, or destination for every buyer at once. The choke point is about concentrated dependence, not a cartoon of total cutoff. Why talk about this now? Public conversation periodically spikes around shipping tension, insurance costs, and delayed loadings. In careful language, a shipping crisis is often a spectrum of friction rather than a single cinematic shutdown. Ships may still move, cargo may still load, but hesitation, higher caution, and stretched schedules can change the feel of the system long before any map turns fully red. Attention around this story can be thin, so the claims stay modest and exploratory. We are mapping a mechanism, not announcing a prophecy. Meanwhile, recommendation engines fill with a different kind of wonder. Stories of artificial intelligence discovering drugs in days, quantum computing framed as the next revolution measured in breakthroughs, not nautical miles. Those videos sell speed and magic. This story sells something quieter and older. Physical logistics still set hard constraints on fuel and freight timing. Algorithms can redesign molecules. They cannot delete a strait. Geography is fixed, so why do markets and headlines treat this lane as if it can suddenly freeze supply overnight? If the coastline does not move, what actually changes when the word crisis enters the shipping news? So what turns a strip of water into a global oil choke point? Not drama alone, not a single headline. Choke point risk is a quieter idea. A concentration of seaborne energy flows through limited paths, paired with thin spare room in the systems that keep those flows on time. Pipelines that cannot instantly replace every voyage. Fleets that cannot appear from nowhere. refining schedules that expect crude and products to arrive in a certain window. When timing slips, the pressure is not only on the map, it is on the calendar. Walk the chain in plain steps. Production hubs inside the Gulf region lift oil and related liquids. Those cargoes move to loading terminals where tankers take on their weight and their paperwork. Then comes the transit itself, through the narrow corridor we have already named and onward toward receiving ports far from the Gulf. At those ports, crude becomes something the modern world actually burns and builds with. Diesel for trucks, jet fuel for flights, feedstocks for petrochemicals, and fuel for power systems that keep cities lit. Each handoff depends on the last. A delay early in the chain can become a shortage of options later, even if nothing has exploded on camera. That is why phrases like freezing world oil overnight are best heard as metaphor. The sea does not turn to ice. What can change quickly is confidence. Skippers, charterers, and insurers reassess risk. Schedules stretch, premiums shift, ships may wait, divert, or move more cautiously. The physical lane is still water. The human layer around it can tighten in hours. We should separate layers carefully. Fact: narrow geography constrains routing options. Ships cannot invent a wider ocean where land closes in. Theory: some analysts argue that prolonged friction could, over years, encourage trade patterns to bend toward other paths, other stocks, or other fuels. That is a long horizon argument, not a proof of tomorrow. Speculation: claims of a total, lasting cutoff of world oil belong in the category of dramatic scenarios. They are not established outcomes, and this documentary will not dress them up as certainty. Substitution exists, but only in exploratory terms. Other routes and energy sources are real. They may not match timing, grade, or cost for every buyer at once. A cargo delayed is not automatically a cargo replaced. A different barrel is not always the same barrel to a refinery tuned for a familiar slate. That mismatch is part of why choke points matter even when the world is large. We keep claims modest on purpose. Public attention around shipping tension rises and falls. Hard numbers are easy to invent and hard to verify from a distance, so we will not invent them here. Think of this chapter as a map of mechanisms, not a forecast. Geography is fixed. Fleets, contracts, insurance, mood, and fear are not. If the physics of the strait never change, what actually changes during a shipping crisis? Ships, paper contracts, or human fear? The answer is often all three in uneven measure. So who feels the pinch first? The tanker captain, the refiner, the airline, or the person buying groceries? And who only notices later? A shipping crisis at a choke point rarely arrives as a single cinematic shutdown. More often, it arrives as layered friction. Ships still move, cargo still exists, yet the system begins to hesitate in small, expensive ways. Picture the map pinch point again. That red danger arc people imagine on a thumbnail is not only about a dramatic barrier across the water, it is about how many decisions stack on one corridor. A master may slow for caution, a charterer may wait longer before committing a vessel, schedules stretch, waiting time grows, insurers and underwriters, reading the same tense signals as everyone else, may price war risk cover more carefully. None of that requires a blockbuster moment. Each layer can still raise effective cost and delay. Fact first, tankers and product carriers are floating infrastructure. They are slow, costly to run, and tied to calendars at loading terminals, canals farther along a voyage, and receiving ports. When risk mood darkens around a narrow lane, the first change is often behavioral. Captains, owners, and cargo interests become more selective. Some sailings divert, some loadings slip. Some ships idle while paperwork, premiums, and routing choices catch up. That is friction, not fantasy. Then the second-order effects begin. Freight rates can firm when capacity feels tighter or riskier. Fuel prices can twitch on sentiment long before any household pump runs dry. Airlines plan jet fuel weeks ahead. Factories time chemical feedstocks and diesel for logistics fleets. Food distribution depends on trucks, ships, and cold chains that burn refined products. Even when shelves and pumps still have supply, the cost of moving calories, parts, and people can shift. The person at the grocery aisle may notice last through quieter price pressure rather than empty aisles. Timescales matter, and they are easy to blur. Some effects are almost immediate: market sentiment, headlines, and risk premiums moving on incomplete information. Others take days to weeks: reshuffled voyages, delayed arrivals, refiners adjusting crude slates, buyers hunting alternate cargoes. Structural shifts, if they happen at all, take longer. New pipelines, new stocks, new fuel habits, these are slow responses, and whether any particular scare triggers them remains uncertain. We should not pretend a neat timetable exists when public evidence is thin. This is also where online legends rush in. Stories circulate of one switch shutting the world, of oil freezing overnight in a total, permanent sense. Treat those as simplified legends unless tied to clear, verifiable reporting. Speculation can be useful as a stress test; it becomes misleading when dressed as certainty. Theory is milder. Some analysts argue that repeated friction can gradually reroute trade patterns, encourage inventory buffers, or push investment into alternatives. That is a hypothesis about adaptation, not a guarantee of collapse. And here is the contrast many viewers feel in their recommendations. Viral films about AI discovering a drug in hours or about quantum leaps rewriting computing sell speed and magic. This story sells the opposite: tempo, dependency, and delay. Algorithms can dazzle in a lab clip. They cannot delete oceans, hulls, or the need for timed molecules to reach refineries. Physical logistics still set hard constraints on fuel and freight timing, even in an age obsessed with breakthrough demos. So the crisis, when it is real, often looks ordinary from a distance: a slower transit, a longer queue, a cautious charter, a premium that makes one cargo less attractive than another. Who feels it first can be the people closest to the voyage and the contract. Who feels it later can be anyone living inside a web of diesel, jet fuel, plastics, and fertilizer that began as seaborne energy. The quieter question is not whether the sea itself freezes; it is how many ordinary decisions tighten when one corridor becomes harder to trust. If the scariest version is often overstated, what is the quieter version that still deserves attention, and what should a careful viewer watch for next? That question is the real suspense in a Chokepoint story. Not a countdown clock, not a single switch. The tension lives in what the public can see, what arrives late, and what competing narratives fill the gaps. Fact first: outside specialists and shipping desks, most of us receive incomplete pictures. Transit reports can lag. Local incidents can be amplified before they are confirmed. Market language can sound like physical blockage when it is really a change in confidence, insurance mood, or waiting time. Silence is not always calm. Sometimes silence is simply the delay between an event at sea and a clear public description of what changed. So a careful filter helps. Ask 3 separations. First, is this a confirmed report of disrupted transit, or is it rumor traveling faster than verification? Second, is the price move a temporary risk premium, the market charging more for uncertainty, evidence of a long-term structural rerouting that would take years to prove? Third, is the story describing a local incident or a systemic shutdown of an entire corridor? Those are not the same claim. Collapsing them into one dramatic sentence is how chokepoint coverage becomes oversimplified. None of this means the waterway is unimportant. It means importance and inevitability are different ideas. Modern energy systems have cushions, uneven ones. Inventories can absorb a shock for a time. Refineries can, in some cases, adjust crude slates and product mixes. Demand can soften if prices rise and factories or travelers cut use. Alternate energy pathways exist and continue to grow, but cushions are not universal. Countries, industries, and households do not sit at equal distance from a delayed tanker schedule. What feels like a headline abroad can feel like a budget problem at home, or the reverse. Theory enters here, and it should stay labeled as theory. Some observers argue that repeated scares do not only frighten markets, they may accelerate investment in pipelines where geography allows, in strategic stocks, or in transport fuels less tied to a single maritime lane. That is a plausible long-run story about adaptation. It is not a promise, it is not destiny. Capital moves slowly, politics intervenes, and projects that look clean on a map can stall for reasons have nothing to do with the strait itself. Speculation is louder, claims that any single strait event permanently ends globalization or freezes world oil overnight in a total, lasting sense belong in the speculation column unless tied to clear, verified evidence. We will not invent that evidence. Dramatic legends circulate because they are easy to remember. A narrow lane on a phone screen invites the fantasy of one cut wire shutting the machine. The quieter mechanism we have been mapping is less cinematic and more stubborn: friction, delay, repricing, and uneven resilience. And that returns us to the title's real meaning. The waterway matters because modern life still runs on timed molecules, not only on algorithms. Feeds fill with breakthroughs that compress discovery into hours or days. Those stories sell speed. This one sells dependency. Steel ships, loading windows, refining schedules, and the confidence to move cargo still set boundaries no model can delete. Watch for confirmed logistics change versus sentiment. Watch for temporary premium versus structural shift. Watch for local incident versus systemic claim. The scariest version may be overstated. The quieter version still shapes fuel, freight, and prices, and it rewards patience more than panic. We began with a simple map and a stubborn fact of geography. Where land closes in and sea room shrinks, giant tankers lose the open freedom of the ocean. That is how a strait becomes a choke point, not through legend alone, and not because every barrel on Earth must stop in a single night, but because energy flows concentrate. Alternatives grow slower or costlier, and timing starts to matter more than most people notice until prices or schedules shift. Across this journey, we treated a shipping crisis as a spectrum of friction rather than a guaranteed cinematic shutdown. Delays, cautious chartering, insurance mood, diverted schedules, and sudden loss of confidence can raise effective cost without a blockbuster explosion. Global oil risk, in that quieter sense, transmits through prices, freight timing, refining plans, the confidence of people who move fuel long before a grocery receipt changes. Fact remains the narrow corridor and the dependence on seaborne energy. Theory is the idea that repeated scares could slowly reshape routes, stocks, or investment. Speculation is the claim that one lane can freeze the entire world overnight in a total and permanent way. Those layers are not the same, and keeping them separate is how careful viewers stay oriented when headlines heat up. Why does this topic keep returning? Because the stakes feel high whenever tanker traffic or regional tension enters the news cycle. Public interest spikes, markets listen. Ordinary life still runs on timed molecules for factories, food distribution, flights, and power systems. We are not inventing a specific secret event here. We are mapping a pressure point that surfaces again and again, precisely because modern systems remain sensitive to delay as much as to drama. And that is the contrast your feed may have trained you to forget. Viral stories promise miracles in hours, artificial intelligence that finds a drug candidate in days, quantum dreams that rewrite computing. Those tales sell speed and surprise, and they deserve their own curiosity. Yet atoms and oceans still set boundaries algorithms cannot delete. Steel ships still move slowly. Narrow water still concentrates risk. In an age obsessed with breakthroughs, the Strait of Hormuz is a reminder that physical logistics remain a hard constraint on fuel and freight timing. Here is a portable takeaway you can carry into the next alert on your phone. Ask what the headline actually describes. Is it a confirmed change in logistics? Is it market sentiment and risk premium? Or is it speculation dressed as certainty? Confirmed friction deserves attention. Sentiment deserves context. Legend deserves a label. You do not need classified details or invented percentages to practice that filter. You only need the patience to separate what is known from what is feared. If this corridor is one choke point, which other silent bottlenecks quietly shape the next decade? Canals, undersea cables, rare minerals, grain routes. Hidden infrastructure rarely trends until something snags. If you want the next calm map of a place the world depends on without noticing, tell us which choke point to chart. Watch the following explainer on the systems behind everyday life. Subscribe if you want long-form context instead of panic. No operational advice, no investment pitch, just clearer questions. On a phone screen, the lane looks small, almost forgettable, a thin blue cut between larger shapes. The dependencies behind it are not small. They touch schedules, confidence, and the quiet machinery of daily life. Geography does not argue. It simply waits for the next ship, the next hesitation, and the next careful reader of the map.